Soundstripe.
So, welcome to this week's episode of Wheels in the Hierarchy, the podcast where we discuss the experiences and challenges faced by aspiring women in the workplace.
We hope you love, laugh, learn and enjoy different perspectives around women in work and leadership.
So, step inside an episode of Wheels in the Hierarchy, empowering women without stepping on toes. This week's episode is the sister to our last episode, where SJ interviewed me about my experiences with being late diagnosed with ADHD. Today, I'm going to interview SJ and speak about her experiences. And the reason that we decided to do these two episodes was that we have referenced our neurodivergent in various podcast episodes that we've done in the past. And we felt that it was important to us to be authentic about the opportunities and challenges that we experience, some aspects about the podcast topics that we discuss. But because we have referenced neurodivergence and neurodiversity, we thought it would be quite timely for us to interview each other because we each have a different, do we say condition?
Yeah, I think diagnosis.
A different diagnosis.
Yeah. And how they merge in in a world is interesting, I think.
So, SJ, would you like to share with us what your diagnosis is and when and how you were diagnosed?
Very formal interview process. I love
That
it.
was very formal, wasn't it?
Well, I love it. No, I love it. I feel quite nervous, actually. I think one of the things that we talk about is being vulnerable, but then when you're being vulnerable and you're having to share, you're opening yourself up. So I'm being very aware, but I think that's good. I think it's just put a disclaimer there that what we talk about can be quite personal, but also, what's the word? Vulnerable. So I think it's been honouring to listeners that obviously we're sharing our story because we think it's going to be useful. And I think one of the things we talked about just before was us wanting to acknowledge that although I've got dyslexia and was diagnosed at university and Pegsy's got ADHD, it looks different to everyone that's got a diagnosis. So our experiences, our stories, our symptoms, although they may be similar, we understand and we're very aware that obviously and acknowledge that it looks different to every person. And that's important to me because I think since being diagnosed, talking about it, there's so much reference that everyone's on the spectrum, or everyone just jumps up, I've got dyslexia. But actually, when I've talked about it in depth about the differences and how I function, how I see the world, it is completely different because we're all different beings. So then it can't be exactly the same, although similar. The way that we interpret things are different. So I wanted to kind of start with that. And I think that's potentially when we looked at answering your question, was at university when I decided to go and do a master's. And my first paper, I think I was the only one in the class that failed on the first paper. And it was supposed to be the easiest. And I remember just seeing all these scribbles as going, absolutely, I just felt such a failure. But that's what triggered the diagnosis, was because actually the tutor then discussing it with them was very clear that actually it's not just about the standard of writing at a master's, depending to a degree, but he noticed the way that my grammar was. And I've always struggled with grammar.
So it was the structure of your grammar.
Yeah. I mean, at school, I was terrible. Like I didn't understand grammar. I still don't understand grammar. So it's just language, terminology, structuring. When you're doing that level, I really struggled. And so it was actually, although you have to wait to university, it's like in mid-20s, having somebody and almost a shrink sit down and do a test with you, you are singled out a little bit, but it did definitely change my life.
And do you feel other than ask a leading question, in what way do you feel it changed your life?
I think we talked about it in your episode of the way that you identify in who you are as a person. So my upbringing was not in terms of my childhood or anything like that, but in terms of education, everything in terms of the report. And I think what we don't really talk about is is quite is it jarring? Is that the right word? When you get a report that talks about you in a document about what's written about what you can't do, how your brain works, how they function. And I remember feeling like so belittled by it, but also so relieved by it. Because for me, it was the first time that it was acknowledged that I see things and process things in a different way to how the world wants you to. Therefore, these are the recommendations. And I think that was meant that I could really embrace the thriving and in terms of education rather than constantly feeling that I'm having to keep up.
So I'm obviously quite a visual thinker as you as well, I know, but I almost see like your world was a set of scales and the scales suddenly flipped the other way so that you actually embraced your skill set and your strengths. Whereas until that point, what you perceived as being your development needs were taking priority in your thinking.
Yeah, I just got so I remember being so constantly frustrated with education. And I still get frustrated with education now because I don't think nothing's changed since I've been at school. I'm always talking to my children and their friends and parents who've got children around learning styles, understanding how your brain works. That's why I'm really interested in the whole neurological part of development, because that is how you process information. And a part of it, I think, was similar to what you were talking about in your last episode around ADHD and how you internalized. I was not internalizing, but I was absorbing what everyone was putting on me. So in education is things like statements of why can't you be as clever as your siblings? Why are you so dumb? Why can't you do that? It's all negative towards you, which then I wasn't internalizing it, but I'm reactive by I'm not doing this. I'm not allowing myself to learn, or I think it helped me to go, I understand I'm not thick like people think I'm thick. The report, what it did was free me from thinking that the whole education system that I was in wasn't adapting to the way that I process information. And in my adult life, I've been able to understand I passed my master's with a merit. I could have not have done that if I didn't go, well, what am I going to do about it? I can, similar to what you're saying, I can be angry and frustrated, or I can flip it and go, well, what can I do? So I got a tutor. I got somebody that understood my quirks and how I see and taught me what the education system was trying to want me to. It's almost like, when you're doing exams, you need to learn what the examiner's looking for.
Yeah.
I had to learn what grammar and standards of what language was in a way that I couldn't get before. No one just tells you how to do an exam. And I think part of it, I'm muffling a bit, and that's my dyslexia, is my brain's going all over the place. So I get a bit of information, and part of the report for me was I've got frontal lobe dyslexia, which means I can't hold information, short-term information very quickly. So I have to kind of put something to it or visualize something or do it. Otherwise I get too stimulated.
Right.
And then it just disappears.
And those people, when you were junior school and secondary school, who commented on your perceived lack of capability, were they your peer group or were they teachers or a combination?
I don't remember it being peers. I mean, I don't think I had the easiest school years. It was all my perception anyway is all very teachers. I remember being pulled in for my behaviour, let's say, of just getting so fed up with teachers and authority figures, shall we say, enabling. I think it's just bullying. I just put it down to bullying behaviour.
They were bullying you.
Just the favouritism between what were they perceived as academia and academics. And I really struggle with the comparison. So when you go, I don't know, it might be, and I think generation has difference, but for my biggest struggle was the comparison between other people. So comparison that I wasn't as clever or intelligent as my siblings. When you've heard something enough times, you then start believing it. So then what's the point of putting the effort in? And then, so therefore my behaviour was like, I'm not going to bother trying. I'm just going to be that. I was on a walk actually with my mum at the weekend, and we were just discussing random topics. And I remember saying her biggest regret about coming in education in the UK was the fact that they changed everything about me, but not my siblings in the education system. So for those who don't know SJ, she, as if it's the third person, it's myself. I grew up in a different country and then came to England when I was 7. And I had the most beautiful, effluent, if that's even a word, curly, wordy writing and very European language. And they stripped that completely. And I couldn't speak English very well. And their dominance of you will speak English and you will learn like we do, and you cannot have a edge of my kids. And basically, I was not allowed to write. I had to start from scratch and write big letters and do the alphabet again. And again, they didn't do that to my older siblings. It was just me. So I think internally in my subconscious, I became very victimized of I'm just not, I am stupid or I am thick because everyone's telling me I am.
So just to recap then, you're the youngest sibling. You started your education, your formative years in a different country where English was not your first language. And then you came to the UK, and the education system said to you, as the youngest of the siblings, you're going to have to basically unlearn everything you've learned now, or suppress everything you've learned to that point, and then aged about 7 have to start learning absolutely everything from scratch, whereas your siblings, being older than you, were at different stages in their education and were not criticized to the same degree for the fact that they didn't speak English as a first language. Is that a fair summary?
I think it's for me, I'm being very conscious to protect, but also this is your perspective, right? And so everything around having a diagnosis is all what leads up to how it impacts you. So that's the backstory. So without any kind of here's a diagnosis, now this is how I live, it made sense why I couldn't deliver what people wanted me to deliver, because part of it was thinking that, especially, when I grew up in a different country, it was France, the language is backwards. So you're saying different things in different orders of the English language. So I thought, well, maybe that's just the way that I've learned and I can't flip it back around the way. But actually, it was just, again, part of it, there was no knowledge. There was no one there to kind of go, oh, you're processing differently. No one really picked up on anything. And as women, we've talked about it before, we're very good authentically wanting to navigate and not be noticed. So instead of me reacting, apart from when I was older, I think I've just had enough of people telling me what they thought I was good and not good at. I didn't react. So I just took it on and decided, well, I am those things that they said. And you would just try and work on, which builds a huge resilience and protection because you're trying to prove yourself all the time. And I think that's where I've used that to excel and gone, right, I'm going to go and do this. I'm going to prove myself. It's all that proving to be good enough, or I want to show that I am capable. And you're trying to deny the things that people try and tell you. So instead of becoming all those things, being stupid, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to prove you wrong. Thankfully, I'm not like that now, but it did take me a long, long time to process post-diagnosis thankfully, as a psychotherapist, you have to go to therapy. So a lot of that was, done in that space of processing all of that and what it meant to have a diagnosis and what did that look like and feel like and how did that impact not knowing what I know now,
So again, just sort of a bit of a recap. Essentially, until your diagnosis, your life up until your diagnosis was kind of in 3 parts, where you were a fluent French speaker for a long period of time, for about 7 years. And then you had to put that little French girl into a box and have nothing to do with her from the age of 7 onwards. And then from 7 onwards, you had to be a fluent English speaker almost overnight. And at the same time, you were having this narrative told to you that you were not as bright as you should be, and that your perception of it now is that you were negatively compared to your siblings, but to other children as well. No acknowledgement of the history of you until 7. And then aged 21, you get this diagnosis that actually has turned on its head the narrative that you've had about the fact that some of the differences in how you thought and spoke just upended and became something else. But thankfully, something that made sense to you. In listening to you, one of the things that has clearly come out is that it has given you a lot of resilience and a lot of, I don't know if it would be fair to say sort of optimism, but a lot of determination to say, whatever life throws at me, I'm gonna do something positive with.
I think part of it is around, it's hard to know what your personality is, isn't it, as well as what's your diagnosis, partly. But I think the main thing is embracing knowing yourself. So regardless of a diagnosis, I think one of the biggest things is you have to know yourself to try and understand yourself, and having the self-awareness of, although it's very, very hard to read a report that is so directive because it's by a psychiatrist telling you that you can't process this and you can't do this, but these are the recommendations in order to be able to do that. It meant that I had almost a pathway to go. It's not because I'm not able to do it. It's because I've been trying to squash myself in a form that isn't how my brain works.
So the gingerbread man
Exactly.
that we were talking
Exactly.
about. Yeah.
And I think once you find that, and thankfully I was very fortunate and I got a really good mentor and tutor out of that report that was funded by the university. I still have and this is a personal thing, I never used the funding to go, I'm going to get a new laptop and the headphones and stuff like that. I've always struggled with that. And I think partly it's because of that childhood of trying to do it myself. And so taking suddenly help when I'm an adult feels uncomfortable. I'm better at people in the workplace going, absolutely have it. But for me, it's still quite a denial struggle to go, I feel like I need these things, because it brings back all those feelings of not necessarily being different, but anyone that's done an assessment or an occupational health assessment, it can be quite jarring. And so if you've been coming from anything that you feel inadequate, and then someone's using quite language is a big thing for me. So if it's something that's, although you can be like when they say, I don't know what I'm trying to say. So one of the occupational health assessments was like around, so I said, I struggle with grammar and the interpretation. So my brain works too fast. So I'm articulate. I know exactly what I want to say, but by the time my fingers start typing, instead of writing the THE, which I know how to spell, it always 99.9 times do TEH, no matter what I do. And I get exhausted by seeing I've done all this stuff. My brain's gone really quick. I feel I'm really articulated. I look at the page and all I can see is red lines because I've done all my spelling mistakes, all the grammar's wrong, all this kind of thing. Technology is a great thing, isn't it? Because it can just do it for you. But it's like, oh, so you're, I did say rubbish. I can't remember the word. It was a very negative connotation. And I was like, that's not actually, that's not who I am. And I've got better at identifying other people's language perspectives that could be quite negative and challenging that. Does that make any sense?
So because of how you struggle with typing a word, but not necessarily selecting the word that you want to type, the actual words that you see other people use, you're aware of the impact of people using not necessarily a wrong word, but a word that perhaps they haven't really thought about, and the impact of that word.
No, what I mean is when you're trying to explain something to someone. So when I had the occupational health assessment and I was telling them about that, because they were asking me about equipment and what equipment do you want? And obviously for work often it's Dragon and you have to train it. And I was saying, but I find it difficult to try and train it and write what I'm trying to say, because no matter what I'm articulating in my mind, that's not what my hands will say. and he used a word to try and describe it, which I thought was quite negative.
Yeah.
I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. So it just made me really more sensitive to go, if I ask for help, it can be perceived as not necessarily weakness, but I'm stupider.
Right.
Because I need this stuff. And that makes me more like, you're not hearing me. So my brain works fast. My mouth won't necessarily interpret what I'm really trying to say. And it confuses people. And then when they tell me what they hear that I've said, it's not what I mean. And that's the frustration of the two worlds colliding, because I know what I want to say, which is why I'm creative, because I don't need to use language necessarily. And language is a very difficult thing for a dyslexic to try and convey what you actually mean.
Yeah.
Because words can be misconstrued. They can mean a different thing to the person who's hearing it. Does that make sense?
It completely does. And actually, and this genuinely was not rehearsed, the exchange that we've just had is a perfect illustration, because I was paying really good attention to what you were saying. And initially I came away with a different meaning on what you were saying to the intention that you had behind what you were saying.
But it's also, that's a storytelling, isn't it? Of trying to explain to someone that how your brain works versus how what you're trying to say doesn't articulate. So that's just reality of life. But what it has done, I must say, having a diagnosis, is I've had to start loving the quirks, and rather than trying to keep constantly explaining the weaknesses to try and make other people feel better.
Right.
So I will be texting away, and thankfully I've got some amazing friends who can kind of either interpret or don't interpret. And when they ask me, I look at it and go, oh my word. So my brain's always talking faster. So I'm typing or responding or doing things. In my mind, I'm a superpower woman. I can do these things. In reality, it all comes out but I don't know how. I'm not articulating now because I'm talking about it. In the moment, it feels like I am doing all the things right.
Mm-hmm.
But when I take a step back and come back to it, because my brain's on that hyper speed, I'm like, oh wow, what was I trying to say there? What is that about? That didn't do that. So it's almost two realities. Similar to what you're saying about the internal and external self. I have a brain that sees things in a different way. I have a lot more ability to think outside the box, always be creative, think in a different way, find opportunities to navigate the world. And I think that's partly with adversity and overcoming that. But at the same time, I have my restraints of what I think I'm doing when I look back at it, i.e. a Word document or something, one language. When I take a moment and come back and my eyes are readjusted, I go, oh, is that what people see? Because in my brain it's perfect. And then I look at it later on and I've had a break and go, well, that's not me. But that's the dyslexia of it's almost like I'm this superpower woman who's got all these ideas and I can think really fast. But the process in which it's being done then interprets it as gobbledygooch.
Yeah.
And that's the frustration, because I'm like, but that's not what I mean. But then that's where the element of feeling dumb is, because that's not what I mean. But that's how my brain has interpreted it, even though I think it makes complete sense.
Well, this segues beautifully into one of my favourite expressions, which is, I know what you think you thought I said, but what you heard is not necessarily what I meant.
Yeah. But that's the element of going, that's why you get stuck in that loop of being, I'm stupid, I'm dumb. It's not. It's just whatever my dyslexic hands and in the moment decides to put out there. So internally, I can interpret. I'm very good at being intuitive. I know exactly what you're trying to say. I can visualize what you're saying. As soon as you ask me to put all that into words and not be in academia and all that kind of thing, it's a different language. But in the moment, in my brain, it's not a different language. But what is presented is a different language.
Yeah.
And that's probably why I'm so aware of the power of words and the language, and why I do drama therapy and psychotherapy rather than normal talking therapies, because there's so much that happens in the unconscious that can't be said in words. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think you've because one of the questions I was going to ask you was around the superpower that you think dyslexia gives you. And what I've heard from you is that you actually have many of them, and your absolute strengths are in your empathy, in your creativity, in your ability to understand people on a much deeper and more personal level than you would if your world was fully academic or verbal. That you've developed massive strengths in your feelings and your empathy and your intuition, and all of those things that we currently call soft skills, which for a long time I've felt has been somewhat derogatory. It's like they're lesser skills because they're soft, whereas academia and language is solid. But I think you've got a bundle of superpowers in that part of our capabilities that we currently call soft skills.
Okay. I'm very bad at absorbing praise. I have definitely tried to, because I think part of the dyslexia has always been you hear, but then you excuse, right? So you kind of going, okay, but I have to still justify. But what you're saying about that, you're always having to please.
Mm-hmm.
I feel I was always trying to overachieve to prove, whereas now I don't do that. I think part of understanding my way of seeing the world, my way of interpreting information. I think the generation we are in, I'm very more vocal. So I've been very open with the way that I process things. So if I've got a new client, or if I'm supervising, or if I'm managing, or I'm in a boardroom, I say, look, visuals are really key for me. Colors are really key for me. I can't hold long conversations on things that don't process or energize my brain. So this is how we need to be doing it if you want the best out of me. And I think by abling to say, if you want the same result, you need to be telling people how you, a bit what you were talking about before, when you're managing someone, you need to know them. I just get there first, which then goes, oh, that's really helpful to know.
Yeah.
One of the things is like, I will muddle my words up. I will mean something, but another word pops into my head. Or if I'm really excited, which I get energized by people, you'll be talking, Pegsy, about something, and I want to jump in. And I used to have to be like, oh, you're so rude, you're so this. But no, it's because I can't hold that information very long. So I just get excited. I want to tell you, and I want to jump in, and then you have to find out, but then you're exhausted and you're stuck in that loop. So there's pros and cons, like many things. But I think when we're coming to it, is back to the theme of, as women, supporting other women to try and understand why they work the way they do, what helps them, what doesn't. I get my brain, I don't know if yours does this, Pegsy, but after a while, it's overstimulated. I get so overstimulated because I've not necessarily so many thoughts. It's exhausting thinking at such a speed, and I'm always at the finish line. So when we talked about the podcast, I already saw it. I can see it.
Yeah.
Same as whenever I'm doing like write-ups, I'm already there. I don't need to know about the journey.
Yeah.
Even the journey is fascinating. I don't need to know. I can't see how my speech goes. I don't need to know the detail. I can just visualize it, and I'm there with you.
And you're right. That's the other thing. Have you noticed how many times that you go from point A to point C? Because you don't need point B, that's just a waste of time. But point C is right. Why has nobody else seen it yet?
Yeah, because people don't have the creativity.
Yeah.
You know, this is the point about, we don't have to justify why we have it. We need to invite people in this world to go join us in this world. And I'm definitely seeing the workplace change now in terms of embracing not just diversity in cultures, but also in terms of embracing all parts of a human being that can bring so much richness. But for us, unfortunately, the damage has already been done, and we've had to kind of change that narrative in order for us to embrace who we are now. I don't know if that's useful. We can't change what we can't change. It is what it is. But I think it's made me more aware that this is just how I process. I have to recognize really quickly what energizes me and what doesn't, what tires my brain, and be very honest of going, I can't do it. So I need different colours, not because it means anything. The amount of times people, well, you use colours in your note writing or you do this. No, it's just to stimulate myself, keep thinking creatively in a world that's quite linear and in my mind quite boring when it's just language, it's just words. There's no, I need to know what's going on behind that.
But that also ties in with your point about how tiring everything is, because there's two conversations going on, or two processing things going on. One is the nature and speed of how we process things. And then the other is almost overlaid on the top of having to either think about what the other people will think about what it is that we're saying and doing, or explaining to other people what it is about the things that we're thinking or saying or doing. So we can't ever go from point A to point C in a straight line. We've leapt to point C, but then behind there's this really fast, jaggedy line where we've got to have a foot in other people's way of thinking, explaining or adapting as we go, so that we do, as quickly as we can, get them to our point C.
But that's the hard thing, is we have to do the work.
Oh, yeah.
We have to take them on a journey. We have to be thinking about what they're listening to and how they're processing it. We have to double check what we said versus what they've heard. But it's all worth it in the terms of once you, I suppose, embrace that these are all the quirks, these are all your strengths, but also knowing where else you can get filled and exhaustion. But once your battery's drained, what else do you need to do? I'm very, the word, when I say creative, but I'm also using my body as a language very much. And I always watch how other people are. And I think in the workplace specifically, if that's even a word, is how I'm fascinated with the non-verbals, how people present in the world, what they're saying or what they're not saying. I'm very aware that we always have a dual dialogue, whether you're diagnosed or not. There's always something that's not being said in the room. And I'm probably more courageous and braver because I'm so intuitive. So I can already know or stop someone's sentences, and I have to really catch myself going, oh, don't jump onto someone's point. And part of it, sometimes I over-articulate waffle because I'm on this 3 different tangents to get them to the point where I'm trying to explain what I'm meaning to say, which could be exhausting. But I have taught myself how to get better at noticing that I'm extremely intelligent, just not in the academia generally sense of the word, but I'm intelligent in terms of what matters in life, in terms of what you were talking about before around people, understanding how people tick, understanding language or the non-verbals. And that's probably what got me into therapy. And when I'm doing it, I absolutely love it. Like there's something around using non-words to articulate a feeling that is so depth in your unconscious that you've never been able to process. And the emotion comes into the room where you can see healing happening. That's transformational for me. You don't need words because then it's too difficult to put language to every single feeling. And that's what's motivating in that day. And I'm talking all day, or I'm presenting all day, or I'm having to do a meeting all about data. That's what drains my batteries. So it's finding out, well, what's next? How do I support people? I'm seeing so much more training around people to be supportive with women and neurodiverse and helping to do that. So that's something I'm quite interested in.
We'll put a variety of links into the podcast. I'll put a link into one book that is by a guy called Matthew Syed called Rebel Ideas. And it's about the importance of having diversity of thought in an organization and the value of that. And that's to your point about how the workplace is slowly changing to recognize the value of having people with different thinking styles, as much as having previously embraced different sort of behavioral styles. They're kind of almost different fitting in styles. but different thinking styles is now currently being seen as being of value to an organisation. So we'll put that in. I think when I've seen you in the workplace previously, the things that I've observed about your strengths are your ability to be really brave in discussions, to stand up for yourself, for people, or for principles. And I think a lot of that has come from the resilience that you've developed over the years. I think you can be empathetically direct, and that links with the bravery, where you will speak truth to power, but with kindness. And I think that is a real superpower for you. But the question that I'd like to ask you is, how do you feel that having dyslexia has shaped you both as a leader and as an employee?
Because as a woman as well.
And as a woman, because you're one of them as well.
So the first, again, I had the leader. What was the first one?
So how has it shaped you as a leader, an employee,
okay,
and a woman?
I think as a leader, it's very much about mirroring and being honest, not vulnerable. Vulnerable feels that you can't be transparent, but transparency as a leader, mirroring what you expect. So a bit going back to when I'm in a meeting, I will tell people what I think is useful. How, if they ask for feedback, I'll be like, you need to think at it from not just what you're presenting, but in terms of what your audience is hearing, because I see things differently and hear things differently, and my mind will go off on a tangent. So how can you help people stay focused, be more storytelling, be more interactive? So I feel as a leader, that's what I try and mirror. So it engages my team. I'm very much more around understanding who they are and why they do things and what their learning styles. And I'll mirror that by saying that I will say things that may not make sense, but I'm trying to articulate something. I will try and go, I need to take more breaks. What I will mirror by going, right, I'm going to go for a walking meeting today. I need to be moving. I need to be away from the screen. You need to take time away from the screen. I know when I get tired, I won't put something on. I need to go and do something physical. So I think as a leader, it's very important to mirror ways that is different than just authoritarianism, if that's even a word. As an employee, I've struggled, I think, as an employee, mainly not because, again, it's my stuff, I think, around the occupational health thing, wanted to give me all this stuff that will help me, but because I've created such my own pathways and adaptations. As women, we're very good at adapting to our situations. So you kind of, when you were talking in your episode, Pegsy, around masking, mine probably was more about adapting. So adapting my learning styles to get what I think they want in order to prove that I can do it. I will reject the extra support because I've done it so much. So why can't I do it now? Rather than embracing that we're in a world where they've got things that will help. They've got great technologies, but because it hasn't been my go-to, that's not what I use. And it feels like an alien trying to tell me that I need help when I'm like, no, I've done it so long, I'm okay. Whereas if it's a staff member of mine, I'd be like, absolutely, go and use whatever you need to do. But for me, it's like, that's still that. I still struggle with the element of someone that's telling me what I need rather than me authentically going, oh, shall we try something? And I think that's also depending who your leader is as well, and if they're approachable and you feel that they're able to invest in you. But as a woman, we are so used to, I think, being drenched with multitasking at such a high level all the time. You are juggling so many decision making. Like, I get decision fatigued so much more quicker than I ever used to. I don't know if it's my age or the fact that I'm trying to do so many things, but in a workplace, whether you're mum or not mum, you, as a woman, generally, you carry such a load all the time. So if you're neurodivergent in any way, you're doubling, trebling that, because you're always jumping to what other people may perceive, maybe think, on top of all the decisions you've got to do in the day. you're already thinking 5, 6, 7 steps ahead of everybody else of what things going to look like. So you're navigating already quite busy, noisy world on top of all the decisions that you're making. So it's impacting me by being able to be more aware that I need to take more of a step back sometimes and not always be at the forefront of all these things, but be more powerful in my silence. So an example of that is I had to reshape a whole service and structure, and so many things were going on. And instead of getting overstimulated, I didn't need to be the voice of saying what was wrong and why it wasn't going to work. I just took myself away and just carried on with the work and presented it, knowing that actually I've got the authority and the experience and the knowledge. And then afterwards was, well, where did that come from? Like, you've just been silently just getting on with it. And I think silence has become more of a power. I don't need to be part of the noise. There's too many noises around, and everyone's got an opinion. Everyone's going to tell you how to do your job. Everyone's going to not like something about you. The moment, it doesn't happen every day, but when I get in that mode of, what I just use what I know, this is my capability, this is what I want, and if you don't want it, that's fine, but this is what I can give you. It silences my mind, because I can just use what I know and my abilities and step in that emotional, then expect me to have to please a whole group of other women or a group of board members or whoever it is. So my encouragement would be just to find and be okay with your limitations.
It seems then that sort of realization has really helped you deal with the noise and accept and work with your dyslexia, rather than potentially see it as something to almost manage and develop strategies around. You're actually embracing it and working with you. What sort of positive ways do you think there have been where dyslexia has helped you in your life?
I think the part of it is it's hard not to see it everywhere. So when I'm looking at, if I'm either doing client work or I'm managing or I'm creating something, is being so much more aware that everyone has a different learning style. And therefore, whatever information that I'm presenting or doing or interacting with, that I have to be so much more aware of other people's way of working or information gathering. And then, so what's been helpful is just to be asking questions. I don't think people ask questions in terms of what will be helpful for you today, or what's useful. And then actually feedback out of a session is going, what was not so useful? What did you struggle with? Communication. Communication can look in different forms. So you try different styles and go, well, which one do you resonate with? Because you can still say the same things, but you're just checking things out. I think that's where I get that. I love curiosity. It's being curious. You're not telling someone how to learn something. You're being curious about which part is useful. So I always remember someone in an old workplace many years ago saying, you can say the same things 3 times, but actually if you change one thing in a different learning style, it will land so many different ways that people can absorb. And I was like, that's exactly what I try and do. I don't know that I'm doing it, but that's basically what you're trying to do. You're not trying to say you will take this information and that's it. You're saying, let me put it in a different context. Let me change this bit for anyone else that's in the room that's a different learning style. I'm not saying I'm pulling you out because you're dumb. I'm saying our brains are magically wired in a different way. So let's work with it. And that's what I try and do.
I love that expression about your brains being magically wired in a different way, because I think that takes it and really embraces the positivity. The things that we've spoken about in this episode and the last are around neurodivergent as opposed to neurotypical. But that is simply an expression to encapsulate the fact that everyone is different. And as you said at the very, very beginning of the episode, SJ, even with a diagnosis, are all different from each other. And I think one of the things that's happening in society now is that we're recognizing the value of difference in so many ways that it's really powerful.
Let me tell you a story as you're talking, actually. So one of the things I learned, and I think I've talked to you about it a few times, Pegsy, is I thought just part of who I am, but it must be part of the dyslexia, is the visualization that I get and using metaphors and stories, etc. Went on holiday and everyone would just say like how, if I've been somewhere once, that's it. It's mapped in my brain and I can take you there. And they were joking. They were like, I'm going to test this. And they drove this random journey in the middle of nowhere in France and said, right, take me home. And somehow my brain was like, I could just visualize it on my brain. And we did it. And then they kept doing that. I was like, hey guys, you're taking the mick now because this is quite exhausting. But it demonstrated that actually that's something that I don't necessarily need a sat nav for. Once I've been somewhere, it's great. And that's nothing to do with education. It's nothing to do with people skills. But actually, it's just a magical, random way that my brain will remember a pattern. So some people probably have numbers. I'm terrible with maths. I cannot get terminology. Language is definitely not my strength. But I'll absolutely take being a sat nav for anybody, because that for me, doesn't matter where I've gone, somehow I will generate a pattern that I can get myself home. And I think that's a pretty awesome skill.
So if I'm going to get lost in the middle of the Sahara, I get lost in the middle of the Sahara.
If I've been there once, I can take you back. Yeah.
In general terms, what are your takeaways on neurodivergence in general and dyslexia in particular?
I think the danger is that we dismiss it in a term that everybody is the same. Specifically, so it always gets specifically and things wrong. But when it comes to dyslexia, everyone thinks it's around your numbers, or everyone has the same way of learning, which we do not. And I have many friends who have dyslexia, and we interact also very differently.
Mm-hmm.
Because not everything's about, although there's similarities, it presents different. And I will keep going on about it, is that we've got to not have an assumption of what we think we know.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be curious about what happens with an individual and their experience of the world. So if you're in a workplace, is being able to, I think the biggest one is yes, it's exhausting sometimes having to teach everybody how you work or how you function, but also it's your responsibility to own and embrace your strengths of saying, you need to be aware that not everybody sees this world exactly the same. And especially, I'm getting tired now, in a leadership role, it is your responsibility to be able to challenge, but mirror and be open to the fact that we're only as strong as our staff if we actually are open enough to know how they function. And if we expect them and we deliver the same way that we understand, then that's being narrow-minded. I'm not going to give you a spreadsheet and go, this is what's going to take it. Is, shall I explain what this part is? What is useful for you to understand? What do I want from you? How do I make that work in a way that you can absorb it? That's the difference between just saying, okay, good dyslexia, everyone assumes you can't bloody type. It's not about that. It's trying to figure out what part of a work strategy or a project or work life that they particularly struggle with, that you can make it a way that they can thrive. And that is different now to when I was growing up, when no one would kind of put a bridge, because it was like, well, you're in that island and you'll have to just try and swim yourself to safety, rather than going, let's give you some tools that you can then support yourself with, get on that raft and sail away in the sunset. There's a big difference.
The difference between giving a man fish to eat or teaching the man how to fish.
Yeah.
My final question to you, in what way would you say that having dyslexia has been a blessing for you?
I'm taking a moment because I think it's been a long time, because I've just absorbed it as a personality trait rather than a diagnosis. I think part of it is because when you said that, I thought, oh, I'm gonna have to swallow and not cry, because it is a beautiful thing to be able to think, and that, people that know me who would listen to this would be like, yeah, she's always wanted to be different. It's not about being different. It's just that you start to love the part that you used to feel it need to change.
Yeah.
And I think it's emotional because it's something that you cannot change, but you love to embrace it, and therefore you want to share it in a way that can be seen and you are seen. That's kind of, I think, something that I don't take enough time, because my energy levels are trying to explain it or trying
Yeah.
to constantly update people what it looks like or feels like for me, rather than just going, yeah, it's a very different thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. I just got in the emotion of it all. So if those don't listen, I had a little bit of emotional cry there. But I think it is something as women we have to get better at, not trying to fight to be seen, and embracing something means you're in love with that part of who you are, because
Yeah.
that's why you are the special person that you are.
Yeah.
Fighting against it is the stuff that you try, and when you don't have a diagnosis, I think, is trying to ramble about why don't I look or feel or do that, and fighting yourself against a world that is trying to shift you into something that you cannot be is a prison to yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the damage that we need to shift. I think we're in a blessed situation where we're talking more, we're having more opportunities. It's a shame that people have to wait so long for diagnosis, but it has to be done right, because it can be misdiagnosed when people jump to the wrong conclusion about you. So I don't even know what your question was, Pegsy, but it was very much around something about
dyslexia being a blessing.
being a blessing. So yeah, I hope for the listeners anyway, I think my takeaways is, whether it's you're being a friend, a mother, an auntie, a sister, a leader, just generally being a woman who has been struggling with whatever it is to try and fit in, is to stop trying and using the energy on the wrong things.
Yeah.
And embracing that you see things in a different way. And that's the beauty of understanding how your brain works, that you see things that people can't see, and what a gift that is to be able to see things differently. And how do we interact with others? I mean, we're doing this podcast with completely different diagnosis, but we make it work and we have a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And we bounce off the fact that we don't really talk about it in that term. We just know that this is the way that we quirks work. Do you know what I mean? We've found a nice way of engaging those parts of ourselves, because it is who we are.
But I also think, what you said there was a really powerful thing to end on. If I gave you a really unique and beautiful gift that nobody else in the world had, you would cherish that and you would share it with other people, and you would say, Pegsy has given me this object that nobody else in the world has had, and it's completely unique, and I love it and I cherish it. I want to share it with you, and you can look at it and you can touch it and all those other things. And yet, if that unique thing is your brain, we seem to spend an entire lifetime explaining why it's not smooth on the edges and the same as everyone else's.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's a really key thing, is to take away the desire, because when I was visualizing it, it was this beautiful diamond and things, but to stop trying to polish it to be a smooth pebble and just absorb the beauty of all of the different shapes and edges and things like that. So that would be our takeaway. Oh, hopefully.
Hopefully our listeners have enjoyed that. And I think part of why I wanted to do this is it's really important to not just share other information, but also we want the conversation to continue. We want people to have not only just takeaways, but feel the power in the room and share your stories. So, what things have you taken away from these conversations? What is it that you have decided to change or think differently because of our experiences? I don't think our experiences are necessarily unique. I think they're unique to us because that's our experiences. And there's so many of us. So how we women can continue to support, empower, not try and diminish each other's stories. We would love to kind of have our listeners engage with us and share is also please download our episodes and share with others, because I think that's the only way we're going to get continued support and conversation going, and how important women to support other women are. So
sounds great.
Until next time, keep a high and stand the time.